Rule number 6. Proper prayer, from a psychological standpoint, is practically a superpower. If you're religious, please understand I'm not trying to be a reductionist or put prayer in a box or anything like that, but I do want to explain at least one very important piece of the prayer iceberg by explaining it and its value from a Jungian perspective. Whether this is the majority of the iceberg or just a scratch in the tip is up to you to decide for yourself. From a psychological and specifically Jungian standpoint, prayer is basically a form of communication with the self, with the voice that speaks to you from your unconscious. Jung says, the God concept, as the idea of an all-embracing totality, also includes the unconscious, and hence, in contrast to consciousness, it includes the objective psyche, which so often frustrates the will and intentions of the conscious mind. Prayer, for instance, reinforces the potential of the unconscious, thus accounting for the sometimes unexpected effects of prayer. According to Jung, prayer brings us into a relationship and dynamic tension with the unconscious. It reinforces the potential of the unconscious, the potential to reveal deep insights about ourselves, the world and the universe as a whole, and the potential to contribute the lion's share of psychological and emotional wholeness. Let's dig a little deeper. What exactly is the unconscious? For Jung, it's basically the source of images, symbols, archetypes, instincts, not just at the individual level, but also at the level of the collective. The collective unconscious is the spiritual treasure of humanity, a massive ocean in which the history of humanity and potentially the whole of the cosmos is recorded. Jung, in contrast to Freud, who saw the unconscious mainly as a dark warehouse filled with repressed desires, saw the unconscious as an ocean filled with not only the repressed desires and instincts of the shadow, but with also an almost heavenly potential. The unconscious, to Jung, was also an ocean from which you can fish out the most valuable contents, like enlightenment, healing, and deep revelatory meaning. Carl Jung's process of individuation, which prayer mysteriously assists with, is the process of unifying the psyche, integrating the opposites to become one with the whole, which, by the way, is very similar to the Orthodox tradition of theosis, becoming one with God, or the realization of the Atman in Hinduism, or even to some degree, the elevation of ancient kings and rulers to the status of a god, deification, which we see in the ancient Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Japanese civilizations, for example. But to Jung, man does not become a god through the process of individuation, which is the manifestation of his unconscious. No. To him, the unconscious, in becoming conscious, does two important things. One, it produces archetypal images much like the images that have been generated in the great religions. And two, the process is accompanied by an otherworldly, numinous effect, and the sensation of finding true meaning in life. Numinous is just a fancy word for a powerful spiritual quality indicating or suggesting the presence of a divinity. So let's take one more look at that Carl Jung quote from the beginning. Prayer, for instance, reinforces the potential of the unconscious, thus accounting for the sometimes unexpected effects of prayer. In the individuation process of self-analysis and discovery, which of course leads to a more balanced whole person with greater confidence, self-respect, and admiration, love, courage, etc., prayer helps move the process forward by pulling out the hidden power of the unconscious mind from its depths. Like Thor when he fishes Jormungandr, the Norse Ouroboros, from the bottom of the ocean, which symbolizes the unconscious. This Ouroboros, Jung said, represented integration and assimilation of the opposite, i.e., of the shadow. So what do you do when you pray? You fish in the ocean of your unconscious for deeper meaning, which comes from yourself, which can be found and communicated with through the unconscious by listening to your heart, so to speak. This is what Jordan Peterson describes when he talks about prayer from a very Jungian perspective. Speaking of the ancient Israelites' ritual of prayer, he says, "Now we don't understand these rituals precisely. I don't know if the people who did this engaged in a meditative ritual, but what do? You sit down and think. Do you pray? Pray being to ask. What do I do next? How do I orient myself in the world? It's a useful exercise to do that. What should I attend to first? Do you ask or do you decide? And it seems to me when I do it, because I do it all the time, I do it every morning, I try to sit down and think, okay, I've got things that I would like to do and things that call to me out of necessity. What do I do first? And it's not so much a decision as it is a question. And I don't know what I'm calling on. I'm calling on my capacity to think, I suppose. But that's not my capacity exactly. I can commune with whatever provides answers, and I can think that's me thinking, but it isn't that. I do believe that I can consciously think, but that's not the same as calling for inspiration. It's not the same process, just like a dream is not conscious thinking. It's something that happens to you, and that kind of inspiration is also something that happens to you. I ask, and I get an answer, but it isn't because I decided exactly. There's an involuntary aspect to the sorting that occurs, and that's the psychological equivalent, I suppose, to this. And I guess the sacrifice is when I feel that I will do whatever it is that calls to be done, then I don't do the other things that I might want to do. And that's a sacrifice. To me, it's the proper sacrifice because my sense is that things don't go properly unless you do what's most important. And that's how Peterson prays. Lastly, I'll leave you with this final word on the purpose of prayer from a Jungian perspective: to identify with the hero, Jung says, in Man and His Symbols. The universal hero myth always refers to a powerful man or god-man who vanquishes evil in the form of dragons, serpents, monsters, demons, and so on, and who liberates his people from destruction and death. The narration or ritual repetition of sacred texts and ceremonies, and the worship of such a figure with dances, music, hymns, prayers, and sacrifices, grip the audience with numinous emotions and exalt the individual to an identification with the hero. So this is another way people use prayer, along with worship and everything else mentioned in this quote, to identify with a specific hero, and mentally take on that hero's character and aspects. We could go a lot deeper here into the realm of mirror neurons and the power of mimicry and the process of individuation, but for now, we'll leave it at that. Prayer helps people identify with and mimic in some way their chosen god, saint, or hero, and thus take on his or her characteristics. Rule number 7. Heaven is useless without bringing it to earth. Unite the opposites. First, a brief word on heaven and earth. The mind and the body, logic and emotion, chaos and order, the unconscious and the unconscious, etc. There's a scripture that says, "Do not be so heavenly minded that you are of no earthly good." And of course, the same applies to being so earthly minded that you're of no heavenly good, so to speak. Balance is key to wholeness. You could be Leonardo da Vinci in your psychological pursuits, but die at 32 because of diabetes or a heart attack or something caused by failing to eat, drink, and exercise properly. Your physical health directly and substantially impacts your psychological health, so there must be balance, of course. For time's sake, I won't go too deep into this, but one more thing. Heaven is useless without bringing it to earth. The higher intellectual and what some would consider spiritual pursuits, which hold the keys to the heavenly, like, say, understanding Nietzsche, Jung, Schopenhauer, the archetypes, the ancient wisdom hidden in the strange world of the religious, perhaps, it's all useless without practical application in the world. The earthly. After all, knowledge puffs up, love builds up. Love being a verb, the highest virtue. This is why adventure and taking action in general is more than a luxury. It's an absolute necessity. Adventure means you step out of your bubble, go out into the external world, and put your belief system to the test. Your ideas, theories, strategies, all of the above. This often results in humility as you fail and your faulty knowledge and experience crashes and burns in the face of true adversity. And that's actually a very, very good thing. You've willingly exposed yourself to the metaphorical and archetypal refining furnace of life that burns like the flames of the phoenix, which results in the burning off of the dross of all that is useless. And that leaves you with the truth, which sets free the best and most useful parts of you. This exposing of your mind/soul to the external world is the joining of the opposites. As you join the order of your ego and rational mind with the chaos and the unknown outer world, and create new order from that chaos. This describes the fermentation step in the alchemical process of the great work, by the way, the alchemist's Magnum Opus, also known as the process of individuation. We now know that even on a biological level, new genes are activated when we face great challenges, as well as new neural pathways as we make a habit out of facing new challenges, ultimately transforming us into something greater, something stronger and better equipped to handle the new challenges. This is what Peterson refers to when he explains the archetypal motif of rescuing your ancestral father from the abyss. When we face the greatest challenges in life, we enter into the abyss, which activates our genetic potential, that is, the power of our ancestors locked up in our genes, rescuing the ancestral father from the abyss by drawing out order from the chaos. And this ultimately is the result of uniting the opposites and achieving some degree of balance between chaos and order, heaven and earth, emotion and logic, etc. It's a risk pursuing the biggest things you can imagine, and it takes a lot of willpower, discipline, all of the above. Nietzsche said, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." That is the nature of living creatures. In other words, if you want to live life on your own terms and be the master of your own fate, you must first have the discipline and diligence to achieve command of your own mind, so that you will obey yourself in that sense. And that can also be viewed from a Jungian perspective as well, that is, your ego must learn to obey yourself, which speaks to you from the unconscious. One final word on uniting the opposites. The anima and animus are described by Carl Jung as part of his theory of the collective unconscious. Jung described the animus as the unconscious masculine side of a woman, and the anima as the unconscious feminine side of a man, each transcending the personal psyche. Jung's theory states that the anima and animus are two primary anthropomorphic archetypes of the unconscious mind, as opposed to the theriomorphic and inferior function of the shadow archetypes. He believed they are the abstract symbol sets that formulate the archetype of the self. So, the anima, animus, and shadow are the components of the mind, the soul, the self. To become whole, you must integrate each component, and especially the anima if you're a man, and the animus if you're a woman. According to Jung, if a man fails to integrate his anima, that is, realize and partake in his feminine characteristics along with the masculine, after middle age, the result in that man will be premature rigidity, crustiness, stereotypy, fanatical one-sidedness, obstinacy, pedantry, or else resignation, weariness, sloppiness, irresponsibility, and finally a childish, and I don't even know how to say this word, remolissement, petulance, with a tendency to alcohol. Ouch. Of course, equally bad results awaits the women who fail to integrate with their animus. And it gets worse. It's also possible to become possessed by your inner anima or animus. We don't have time to dig into all that right now, but I'll leave it at this. We must all learn to properly unite the opposite within, and failing to do so is disastrous. In fact, it's a big part of the problem men and women are having in today's society. Many women, according to many Jungian psychologists, are blaming men and disowning masculinity, and many men are doing the same. In modern media, we see a struggle to properly honor the feminine. It's desperately needed, but in most cases, we fail horrifically, with most movies elevating female characters in part by shaming the male characters, and maybe worse, by giving the female leads primarily masculine character traits. So think the Tomb Raider style 5'2" girl putting a beat down on a 6'5" man built like The Rock. Entertaining, sure, but not even close to reality, and worse, not even close to honoring the feminine. Many people see this as healthy because it elevates women, but it's only intensifying our culture's worship of the masculine, just in a female body. And our society and media neglects the equally important feminine characteristics more than ever. Now, I'm not saying anything against women or against men. It's important to make the distinction. I'm talking about the feminine and the masculine. In the past, we've given the masculine the lion's share of the honor and attention. Today, most of our media scorns and alienates men in an attempt to honor the feminine, but they fail to do so properly and ultimately honor the masculine all the more just with female actors. As a whole, society is left weaker than ever as we have failed to properly respect either the masculine or the feminine. Both are equally important, and it's suicide of a sort to value one over the other. And that's all I have for you guys today. If you liked the video, give it a like below and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.